What's up y'all, welcome back to Fish at the Moment. In this video, I want to show you an offshore bass fishing cheat code that lets you eliminate 90% of your lake in less than 5 minutes. Let's get into it.
What's up y'all, today I'm out here on Beaver Lake in Arkansas. It's the middle of July and I'm going to try to find some fish on some offshore ledges, points, or some type of structure. This time of year, we should be able to find a thermocline, and the way we do that is basically by going out here into the middle of the channel on whatever part of the lake you're on, just the deepest water you can find, then pulling up your down scan view and cranking that sensitivity up as high as possible. This will let you know where that thermocline is kind of setting up, and as you can see here, we have a pretty good defined thermocline right about 25 feet of water. What that thermocline is basically where the warmer oxygenated water at the top of the water column meets the cooler, less oxygenated water at the bottom of the water column. And basically the fish are going to be setting up above that thermocline or at the thermocline this time of year. Now that we know that that thermocline is setting up in that 25-foot zone, we can actually come in here and now do a cool trick on our mapping, which you can do on pretty much every fish finder on the market, but you can set depth shading on your map right in that 25-foot zone to make sure that you're graphing areas that are in the right depth zone for that day. The way I'll do this is, actually I need to change my depth shading a little bit, is we go to our chart options here on my Lowrance. It's a little bit different on other fish finders, but it's pretty much the same deal. And I just go to shading here, and then I have this depth 2 set. So I'm gonna go here to depth 2. And as you can see, I have 25 feet of water shaded right now, but those fish are going to be 25 feet or shallower. So I'm actually going to go in here and I'm going to set this to 20 feet because there's a little bit of a bleed over effect with this Lowrance unit. So we're going to go over here and we're going to set this to 30. And what that should do is it should set it so that we're highlighting that 20 to 25 foot zone. If we did it correctly on the mapping, yeah, there you go. You can see that that depth highlight now is really shading really well that 20 to 25 foot range. And now what we're going to do on our mapping is basically find areas where that 20 to 25 foot range hits that creek channel, because in the summertime, that's where a lot of these fish are going to be setting up. You don't necessarily need to be fishing exactly in 25 feet of water, but you want to make sure that there's that depth of water close by, even if the area is a little bit shallower. Sometimes those fish will set up shallower on these spots, like 10 to 15 feet, but you want to be at least close to that 25 feet of water. So anywhere where that red is kind of touching is really what we want to find. And more importantly, it's really good if we can find an area where there's a transition on the map between a flatter stretch and a steeper stretch of contour lines. This is similar to fishing like a rock transition up shallow or like the end of a bluff wall. Basically, the contour lines get tighter together where a bluff wall is, and the same thing happens offshore. And so finding areas like right in here where there's that transition zone, and also maybe like right up around here, you can see there's another transition where it gets really tight and then they start to spread out right through here. These are going to be kind of the zones we're looking for today, and they pop really well with our mapping set up the way it is. So we can now get out of here. Let's go back to our main view, and we're going to go to our chart with our 2D sonar and side imaging, and we're basically just going to graph through here. And what I want to do is I want to go through this zone and see if we can find any wads of fish. There's, you know, a fish here or a fish there scattered on the screen right now. Most of those are going to be gar, most likely, just based on knowing how beaver sets up. Those really giant blobs could be big like spoonbill, and then those longer arches, if we kind of switch over to our 2D sonar, those longer arches that are barely visible, those are actually going to be gar. Bass are going to be a combination of kind of those two arches you see on the screen. They're going to be somewhat long and they'll have some yellow in them. They'll be somewhat thick, but they're not going to be either just this big blob like the first one you see there, or that gar, which is really thin and narrow. We have to kind of find the combo there. So we're right on that break, right kind of where we need to be. And I'm going to keep graphing here until we see something. There's a lot of water to cover, so I'll let you guys know when I start seeing something interesting on the graph here. Ooh, now that looks pretty good right there, guys. Got a little rocky spot there on our side scan view, and then also on our 2D sonar. We can see there's a few fish setting up around here. There's not a ton of them, but we're getting into something. Let me switch back over here. Ooh, you can see those fish suspended up there. Look at those fish. They're suspended up high in the water column all through this area. There's actually quite a few of them. right on the transition spot on this mapping, you can see that there's a little bit of a log sticking out there. There's a bunch of fish roaming and chasing suspended. You can see them all through there. There's a bunch of them. That is a great looking spot right there. Even though those fish are suspended, those are easily catchable. We can catch them on a variety of different baits, from a hair jig to that tush with the spunk shad, a couple different baits. May try a hover rig, not really 100% sure what I'm gonna throw, but plenty of fish right there. You can see those arches are not like the arches I showed earlier. They're not as tall as those big blobs, but they still have some weight to them, and they're a little bit longer than that big blob also. So those are all bass right there, which is awesome. You can see them all on that 2D sonar as well, or that down imaging. So we're going to mark right here that with fish. I'm gonna mark a couple of things here. So we have that side scan view. We can actually mark, there was a little rocky patch right there, which looked really good. Again, I don't have my traditional setup on the boat right now where I have the live scope or anything like that. So without forward-facing sonar, I basically need to mark all of these fish like this and make sure I have those waypoints clearly marked, so that when I get up on the front of the boat, there's definitely some fish right there. When I get on the front of the boat, I'll be able to check all of that. I really like that. I think there may be even some more fish potentially down this little rocky ridge right here, so we can check that, but there's definitely some fish. They're right on that transition point where the contour lines are really steep and then they start to flatten out and spread out a little bit. That is one of those transition zones. That's exactly what we're looking for on our mapping. It pops super well when you do that depth shading, and whether you're fishing shallow or offshore, finding that is always going to be a really good indicator there's going to be fish nearby, as long as you have bait and you're in the right depth zone, which you can use doing the thermocline, everything I showed already in this video. So let's get up on the front of the boat. We should be able to catch some of these fish, and hopefully we can catch a bunch of them because there's a lot down there. Okay, so let's get lined up on these fish with our mapping. Again, no forward facing today, so I'm gonna have to line up old school style. Got a range ring set on my mapping here that's 150 feet, so I need to basically get those waypoints about halfway between my boat icon and the outside of that ring, and then I have a heading arrow pointed ahead of my boat on my mapping so I can get lined up exactly where we mark those fish. And right about there should be good. So I'm gonna spot lock, and now I'm going to line up a cast ahead of me. I got a little tree up there, I can kind of cast that. We're gonna fire up there. We should be now right in the middle of those fish. So make a few casts, see which bait they might be liking best today, and see if we can get one in the boat. There we go. First cast on these fish on the old HD hover rig. Nice, super fish roller. I love this. Is one of my new favorite baits, guys. Literally first cast on these fish too. This is so fun. I figured out this bait on Grand Lake a while ago, guys, and I haven't had a chance to show you in a video, but that is a really nice fish first cast on this spot. Don't need forward-facing sonar to catch him on the hover rig or any type of Demiki style bait. This is a great rig regardless of that. Here we go, guys. That's the bait I just got that fish on. It is the 6.5-inch Raid Super Fish Roller on a 6/0 1/4-ounce HD hover rig. This is an awesome rig, guys, especially when you don't have the forward facing, because it draws so much attention. It is a big profile bait, gives off a lot of flash, and all I was doing on that, I actually got 2 bites on the exact same cast, as I'm firing that thing out there, and we saw all those fish suspended on our down imaging 2D sonar. So I let that bait sink for about 5 seconds, and then all I'm gonna do is literally just shake my rod and reel really slow. And all that's gonna do is bounce that bait. The way that the hover rig is set up in this bait is that it will rock that bait side to side, and it gives it a ton of flash. And those fish that are just in the middle of the water column will come up and grab it. And so it's not a super fancy technique. It's very simple. I'll sometimes stop it, let it fall for just a minute, just in case I'm pulling it too high, just to let it get back down there. And once it kind of falls back down a little bit, again, just shake that rod tip. Super easy technique. And you don't need the forward facing. I am spot locked right now. My trolling motor is pointed the opposite direction. Don't have forward facing. I just have literally have my mapping down there. You can see that. Just have my mapping on, and I'm just working that deal. And it is an absolutely deadly technique, regardless of whether you have that forward facing or not. And when those fish are suspended, like we saw on the graph, they will choke this thing. Uh-oh, here we go. May have found something right here. We can see a few dots on that side scan, and there's a few fish that are set up on that 2D also. I'm gonna mark that with a fish icon really quick. Same thing here. Regraph over that for a second. See what we got. There are definitely a few fish around. Don't know what those are though. They're pretty long dots. I just don't know if there's a bunch of fish stacked. It looks like there's just a bunch of fish stacked together down there. Really tight to the bottom. You can see them on that 2D pretty clear. That's a really nice looking deal. There's some smaller fish in there mixed in, I think, as well. But it looks like there's some fish that are just down on the bottom down there. Let me switch over to this again. I want to graph through here. Yeah, there's definitely some fish stacked up here. Look at that, guys. 2D sonar's popping off. We have a nice little break. Look at all those fish. There's a bunch of them down there. 20 foot of water. They are all stacked up down there. It's kind of hard to see on the down imaging. Yeah, if I put a side-by-side comparison, you can see the fish really clearly on 2D sonar. You can't see them as clearly on down imaging, but that is not a problem. That's exactly what we're looking for. Mark that one more time. Right on this little break. I'm right here. Again, kind of a little bit up on top of this deal, but there's another little transition where the lines are tight together and then they transition and get more spread apart. That's exactly what we're looking for. This looks like a spot where we can actually make some damage happen. It's right in the perfect depth zone, right where we need to be. Let me go over this deal. There's a little brush pile too. It's kind of nice. Some of this is just my boat wake and stuff too, but oh, there we go. That's the money shot right there. Look at that right there. Those fish are suspended, 20 feet of water over that, right around that brush. I'm gonna mark this too. I know I'm marking a lot of waypoints, guys, but this is necessary when you don't have the forward facing. It's, oh, I made that a phone. I do that all the time. I don't know why I always hit the phone. But anyways, there we go. So we got those fish found. Let's spin the boat around. Actually, the wind's coming from this direction, so I'm actually gonna put my boat over here. I'm gonna work my way into the wind, and I'm gonna fire on those fish because those look perfect, and I think we can get quick in a hurry. Come on. Got him. There we go. Nice. Finally got another one here on the old hover rig, HD hover rig, and that fish roller. I had 2 bite at that cast too. Saw those fish suspended up. It's exactly what we needed. And the only thing I can get him to bite on right now is this deal. This is awesome, dude. I love this rig. This is something that I've just kind of started to do, and I picked some of these up and I didn't realize how good they were until I took them to a trip on Grand Lake and smashed them on it off camera. Nice little fish. Just throwing that big old bait, and it just really draws a lot of attention. That bait basically rocks side to side, and on that 1/4 ounce 6/0 HD hover rig, it's a really big hover rig. It will get down there deep where those fish are, and you can work it really aggressively compared to a standard like hover rig or even like a little Demiki rig, because there's a lot of weight to it and you can just sit there and shake it. So what I do is just get that bait down there, let it sink down for like 10-ish seconds, and then I just start bouncing that rod. You can bounce it pretty aggressive when you is all said and done, because that bait is pretty big. I was thinking this warmer weather, those fish like that bigger profile bait, and I think a lot of guys are not throwing this like really big hover rig, that big 6/0 HD hover rig. It has a weed guard in it. Normally I just cut the weed guard off and put it in this bait, and I'm throwing it on a pretty stout spinning rod. This is a 7'4" medium heavy power fast action Denali Lithium Pro spinning rod, so kind of beefy, but when you just put it on, I have 12-pound fluorocarbon leader and a 20-pound braided line, main line, and just beefing up my spinning rod setup, shaking that deal. No live scope, again, just got mapping down there. I don't know if you can see that super well, But I'm just firing that thing out there and just working it, and they will eat it. It's a little bit tricky because you don't know the exact cast. I mean, honestly, if I had live scope, I'd be catching them even better right now off this spot, because you can just watch them follow it and you can kind of trick them into getting it. You know exactly where those fish are. So, I mean, if you do have forward-facing sonar, it's even better with this rig. But even without it, just throwing that thing out there and just shaking it like this is extremely effective. Get some really good bites, and you don't necessarily need forward facing to use this technique. And I think this bait in particular is great because, again, it's bigger and has a lot of drawing power. There we go. Finally. Feels like a good one too. Been making repeated casts on this deal, and I've been getting a few small bites on a few different baits, but finally got one to commit to the football jig. Man, these fish are kind of picky today. Nice little fish. 3/4 ounce football jig. Just down there on that little rocky spot. Nothing crazy, just a football jig fish. These fish are very, very tough to catch today, guys. I'm finally getting the casting angle and everything dialed in after getting a few bites. It's just, these fish, I think, are either really pressured or just the conditions are not great. I don't think there's any current or anything. We haven't had a lot of rain or anything like that. So being 11 o'clock in the afternoon, the bite is just tough right now. And when that's the case, the two best baits I find are some bait that can work in the middle of the water column, like a hair jig, the tush with the spunk shad I throw all the time, or that hover rig with that fish roller. And then the other option is to just slowly drag a bait like this football jig down there. You can throw a big worm, a drop shot, whatever it is. And you're not going to probably end up getting loads of bites. I say that as I get back-to-back bites. You're normally not going to get loads of bites, but I did here, or at least got another one. This feels like a decent fish, actually. And sometimes you just kind of have to slow down, pick up a jig, and just drag on them. Good one, real good one. Good one for beaver, at least. Dang. Get up here, fish, football jig fish. That's what I'm talking about. There were some good ones down there. Solid 3-pounder. That's a really nice beaver fish right there. Don't catch a lot of those out here. Nice fish on that 3/4 ounce football jig. Strike King Menace grub on the back. Nothing crazy, but a beautiful fish. Nice right there. There we go, guys. Nice fish right there. Solid 3-pounder. Get back down there, fish. Got the cast now. Got the bait. That's what we're talking about. Lining up on these waypoints, guys, takes a little bit extra time compared to using the forward-facing sonar, but it is not that big of a deal. It just takes a few extra casts. And now that I've kind of got to line up, actually, I'm not really even using the waypoints at this point. I have my boat spot locked, and I have a spot picked out in front of the boat here. It's just to the left of a little stick up out there, and that's where my cast is going. And I can put my bait within, you know, 10 to 15 feet of where I need to keep it. And it's a very reliable way of keeping your bait in the strike zone. And all I'm doing with that jig is just slowly dragging it. I was not even realizing that fish was on there until he had that thing choked, because I was talking to y'all. So those fish just want that bait really slow right now. 3 fish now off the spot though. 1 with that hover rig, and then 2 on the football jig. Let's see if we can get one more here. Got a good one. At least feels decent. Another fish. Oh yeah, another decent one. At least for beaver standards, pretty good. Football jig bite is on today. They won't touch anything that's off the bottom other than that first fish that bit. It's another really good beaver fish. Nice fish. I love catching them on the football jig, guys. Beautiful fish. Just dragging that thing down there. Nothing fancy. Just old school jig fishing. Marking them on side imaging, down imaging, and casting at waypoints. Beautiful little fish. Solid little 2-pounder, maybe 1.75-pound fish. All on that 3/4 ounce football jig and that Menace grub trailer. And guys, this is exactly how I grew up learning to fish offshore. just marking spots with 2D sonar. I didn't even have side imaging or down imaging at the time. And while those are also helpful, I mean, I found these fish with 2D sonar no problem. And I'm just lining up on a waypoint over here. You can see I have my track that I'm basically just lining up back on top of. And then I have a mark right now marked out here on the bank where I know to make my cast, which is very helpful. In addition to having the waypoints, you can even drop a marker buoy. I used to do that all the time when I was learning how to line up on offshore structure. And throwing the football jig is a great way to learn offshore fishing if you don't have forward-facing sonar. You can feel the bottom, especially with this 3/4 ounce jig. Just let it get to the bottom, wait for your line to stop moving, and then just sweep that rod to the side and make sure you're maintaining bottom contact. You want to feel that jig on the bottom. If you're not feeling your jig down there on the bottom, there's two reasons for that. One is you are either not using the right equipment or you are not letting that bait get all the way down to the bottom. So as far as equipment goes, I would highly recommend investing in a higher end rod for offshore football jig fishing. That bait's a long ways away from the boat and you have a lot of line outs. So the nicer the rod, the better you're gonna be able to feel that jig. A $50 rod, honestly, is just not going to cut it out here fishing a deep jig. It's fine if you're flipping up shallow, throwing a crankbait or a spinnerbait and you have 30 feet of line out. But when you have 75, 100 feet of line out and it's down there in 20 feet, using a rod that is more in that like $150 price point range or up is what I would recommend. I use a really cheap reel though still. This is Abu Garcia Black Max. It's a $30 reel I got at Walmart 6 years ago. So you don't need a fancy reel. And for line, you definitely want to make sure you're using fluorocarbon. Monofilament is not great for this because it has a lot of stretch and it doesn't transmit the feel as well. So fluorocarbon line, I use like 16 to 20 pound fluorocarbon with my 3/4 ounce jigs. And then 7'4" heavy power worm and jig rod from Denali, and the Lithium Pro series is my favorite football jig rod. And just dragging that jig down there nice and slow, maintaining bottom contact, and all of a sudden you'll either feel that jig be weightless and where you basically aren't feeling the bottom, or you'll just feel them slightly tap that bait like that last one did. And it's a pretty straightforward deal. It's not complicated fishing from a technique standpoint. It's complicated finding them because you have to put a lot of time in. And honestly, it took me probably about 2 hours, 2.5 hours of graphing to even find this school of fish, because once you get into July and August, the schools are not as established as they were in June. So you're gonna have to graph a lot more, and finding a good group of fish can be challenging that has even like 15, 20 fish in it like this one. So you really have to put some time behind the graphs in July, especially getting into August. August is even worse. At that point, you know, once I hit mid-August, I sometimes just start fishing up shallow rather than offshore because it gets so challenging. But for now, we're still catching some fish and the jig is getting it done. Well guys, today was a little bit of a grind, but we did manage to put 5 fish in the boat, which is really solid. Caught those first few fish on that HD hover rig. This is the 6/0 1/4 ounce HD hover rig on that 6.5 inch Raid fish roller. The way I rig that is you basically just put the hook point in about 1/4 inch down the head of the bait. This bait's kind of all torn up. You then thread that lead into the bait, and then you pull the plastic over the nose of that hover rig, and now all of that plastic is buried up in that bait, and that bait rocks side to side extremely well. It works great when you're trying to target those fish that are suspended up off the bottom. They'll come up and eat it. And then if there are fish down on the bottom, a great technique, especially when you're fishing deeper water, 25+ feet of water, 20 foot of water, that's relatively clear, is that football jig. This is just a locally made 3/4 ounce football jig that I pick up, and I then put a skirt on with a Strike King Menace grub. This is a regular size Menace grub in the blue craw color. Color doesn't really matter to me at all. Just having a 3/4 ounce football jig is really helpful. And I love that double cable weed guard on this football jig in particular. So enjoy that. And I talk about my equipment in this video, so you guys should have all that information. So hopefully you learned something about how to use your contour maps to dial in the depth you should be graphing, and then finding the correct types of schools when they're more busted up like they are in July, to at least put a few fish in the boat. It's gonna take a lot of extra time graphing. It's not gonna be as easy as it was in June, but if you put your time behind the steering wheel, you can still find some really nice fish like I did today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to Fish the Moment for more content like this. We'll see y'all next one.